Thanks for staying here on News Desk. The coalition of civil society groups in Ghana has backed calls for investigations into the activities of a militia group linked to the governing New Patriotic Party, DI. The group was found to have been operating from the Christian Castle in a JoyNews documentary, Militias in the Heart of the City. Now, it's been 6 days since the documentary was broadcast, and there have been calls from Parliament, security experts, academia, and some Ghanaians for thorough investigations into the activities of the group. The government, through its ministers, has attempted to underestimate the impact of the expose. The accounts have only been conflicting. There is a history, but this is the story so far. I've been joined in the studio by the Executive Director of the Institute for Democratic Governance, Dr. Emmanuel Akwete, to talk more on what IDEC's stance is on holding this dialogue towards disbanding party militias. Thank you so much for your time. Let me take your initial thoughts on party militias and their operations.
They are illegitimate. In a democracy, you shouldn't tolerate militia. In a democracy, you talk, you dialogue. You try to find there are debates that must go on until you come to the point that you are able to move forward. Militias, weapons, violence, confrontation, and so on is not part of the civic culture, which is what democracy thrives on. So it is not to be tolerated, zero tolerance. Maybe when the talk takes place, and it's good the president is championing this. That means that it is going to come off and has a higher probability of succeeding, because when you have that, you know, he's head of state. He's not doing this as MPP. No, he's head of state, father of the nation. And once he's championing it, will come to the point where his idea of also going the legislation route might probably lead us to a situation where we would now say that any party that builds armed militia or vigilantes, armed vigilantes and so on, risks being proscribed. Is that serious? Because democracy, the space, the open space where we can debate and within our rights and so on, does not tolerate.
You sound very optimistic about this said meeting or dialogue the president has proposed. But we are here tomorrow, Thursday, is exactly 3 weeks after the president made that call. And here we are, the parties have not even met. For many Ghanaians who have reacted to this, how can we trust them to do a good job on disbanding party militias when over 3 weeks they can't even decide how to meet and where to meet and how to do it?
Actually, the meeting not coming off quickly is an institutional problem, is a structural problem. You see, the president spoke as head of state. The instrument for the head of state to call parties to dialogue, okay, and those who put the process forward quickly for the talk is usually the civil service. It's the civil service, because the president spoke as head of state and his instrument is the civil service, the public service. Unfortunately, this is the first time this is happening in 27 years. Probably in the last 60 years, we've not had the two traditions or two major parties having this kind of talk. So there is no machinery that could have acted on the president's orders or directives because it is more or less state business. You see, it's a business of the state, the head of state. The party machinery or bureaucracy is not equipped for this kind of assignment. No, they can't. So the expectation that immediately it was said they are quickly coming up and so on, they do not have that bureaucracy, both parties. And they also don't have that experience because they've not been doing it for many years. The best we have seen them do, as the various groups refer to in the statement, is that it's often collapsed. There's a boycott, they won't talk, there is anger, there's a walkout, and so on. And it has happened on many occasions, including the transition after elections when outgoing government has to hand over. It's not an easy talk.
So what makes you so optimistic?
What makes me so optimistic is that it still can be done. That's why we talked about technical facilitation. We believe strongly that bilateral talks is very important. It has to start. It needs to be facilitated so it comes off. We are focused more on how the talk could come off quickly. It's the most important, the most significant development in our democracy. That two giant parties, we used to call them duopolies, they are like two monopolies, you know, are now telling the world and their members that we want to talk. We want to talk about things that will strengthen our democracy. We want to talk about what to do about militia and so on. And the person championing it is the head of state. So he has powers, he has resources, his command, his law, you know. So it's a very exciting time. Now, what we are having is the difficulties, the preparatory difficulties. Because if there was a machinery, for instance, if it had been in some jurisdiction, for instance, let me give you an example like the UK. You know, for the first time in 2010, when they were to form the coalition government, here we do handovers, we allow the two parties to meet, appoint their chairman and so on. In a system like the UK, they don't. It's the civil service job. Whitehall, you know, would have the head of civil service or something, will bring a team quickly together. They flesh the issues that are going to be discussed. They do quite a bit of work, and they invite them, and they meet within a certain space of the state, and everything is facilitated and so on, because the state is superior, because the president as head of state has looked at what is in the national interest and says, I want you to do this.
But
so even in hand of...
Sorry to cut in, but some believe the president is actually stalling the process. That's their belief, that by giving in to the demands of the NDC, maybe we could actually have a meeting.
Actually, lots of, with these kinds of process, there will be compromises. Everybody will lay out their demands. But as you sit down, you find out that some of the demands that they are making really would not impact anything. They would agree and so on. That's why these talks are not conducted in the full glare of the media. Because sometimes I think the media also stokes the fire. You know, the sensational reporting and so on. I can give you an example. We want to see the bilateral talks, whether it's now or at the end. You need the bilateral talks to make the breakthrough on the concessions, on the reforms, on what they agree they are going to do. They control Parliament. And so they must agree on what they are going to do in the national interest and for the nation for the process to move forward. So bilateral talks, but how do you get bilateral talks started in a new situation for us, when indeed it would have been the civil service to convene this? But there's so much mistrust, even within the ministry, civil service as with the police, which is why they form militias and so on. So that's why we're saying that there are people, in fact, I think that civil society organizations with the competence to do this, some have been involved in promoting peace in other countries, in war zones, and so let them come together and start talking to the two parties. We don't belong to either. They are important to our democracy. It is important that the talk takes place because it's going to open up to so many other things that would strengthen the system. So how do we go? You cannot say the president is stalling it. Actually, the president doesn't have the machinery to convene it. And the parties don't have the machinery.
So the NDC writes into the president.
You need a new, it's good. The NDC, in fact, the way they wrote and so on, actually demonstrated their commitment. But it doesn't answer or fill the gap of the machinery, administrative machinery that ought to have been there, trusted by both, to put the thing in place, to take the talk. It's not just coming to talk and so on. They would have to come face to face already with a whole lot of issues sorted out and a paper on the table. And then it will be facilitate. They need somebody who's, that's what we call the mediator, you see. So it's a gap, an administrative gap.
Okay.
And we are not equipped for this, because this is the first time we're doing this.
Would it have been more ideal for them to have met first before asking for these mediators or the international community to be involved? Because Dr. Vladimir Intridansu, for example, thinks that this is a bit premature.
No. It depends on what he's talking about. That is, if you want other stakeholders, as we call them, of course, the armed militia thing and the way it's not just a matter for the parties, it's a matter for all of us. Because when they start fighting, ordinary people, property, life and property is destroyed.
But the parties own them.
Yes, but they were not voted to come and form armed militias. They were voted to accelerate our development, respond to our needs as human beings, and create better conditions for us to live in and to grow. So the militias are anathema to a democratic party. And so it's not just a matter where it's gotten to. We gave you a mandate to do something, and you're doing something different. That is even dangerous to the health of the society and its survival. So that is a no-go area for them. However, to ask various other groups to come to the table, it's a process. Okay, for now, the bilateral conversation has to take place, but if you leave the two alone, that means you say, oh, but the two of them can. They don't trust each other. A party position does not define trust. So you say, oh, this chairman, call that chairman, and they all said, oh, Charlie, Jack, Inshia, and so on and so forth. It's not that easy. There's a lot of pain, anger. The suspicion is real. The mistrust is real. Actually, the militias or the vigilantes and the armed, direction they're moving show that the mistrust is deep. It's so deep that they don't even trust that state institutions can be impartial and relate to them. So from that point of view, there's also a lot of emotion. That's why we said, look at what happens in Parliament. The boycotts are many on extremely important things. And when you go into it, one side did not trust the other enough and vice versa to even give them the information they need. So it's not, when you say they should meet first, what do you mean? What are they going to talk about and so on? And where would it lead? So fact, these are considerations.
These parties own the party militias, and I believe that the president's call alone is enough reason to say that they admit that they do have these militias.
Yes.
Earlier I said allegedly. I'm just
That's
trying
why
to
we
put on
said
the
they
fact
should
that
dissociate
they are.
as part of the efforts towards they should dissociate themselves.
So,
maybe
Doc, what is your proposal? What are you putting on the table in ensuring that these parties indeed meet and we get a resolution to this?
That's why we called for. First of all, they all said, yesterday we heard that there was a statement from His Excellency, the President's office, that he doesn't mind mediation. Okay, but the mediator is a moderator, like chairman, and sometimes the chairman needs to be assisted. So we said, this talk is so important, it should come off quickly. And the bilateral, so we use the word bilateral. Bilateral means the two parties are the key principal actors. So what it means essentially is that let not waste time writing letters here and there, but let groups engage them. They talk to us, they talk to other organizations and so on. And those of us with a sense of how it could all start have to get in to start the preparation. What messages do you carry across? What are the critical issues you are going to start with? What method of conversation? It's not that you don't start with a debate. You have to frame the issue in such a way that the real reflective conversation begins, and you have to move them to a point where they agree that this thing is affecting everybody so badly. So then how do we go forward and so on? And because this is a trigger to national dialogue, or it is that which had opened the door. Okay, for the national dialogue is a call that has always been on the table for the two parties to meet. Because of their position in Parliament and the way they've divided the electorate, okay, and even the margins for winning elections and so on, and the fixed term, nobody can go beyond 2 terms, at least for now. It is important that anything we want to do with long term, okay, objective, that it must last, it must be sustained, you need a certain consensus between the two parties, because after all, they come to government and so on. So what we said ought to be done is that we are just looking at moderator and packing a lot into the moderator or the what do you call it? What is the name? Mediator. But they first need to clear the way. The machinery that doesn't exist, which would have brought this up quickly, must now be rolled. That's why we say that maybe in the circumstances where civil service is not doing it or they don't trust each other, them a lot, could civil society groups with that ability go in quickly to say, okay, how do we begin putting the agenda together? Where are we going to meet? Okay, who are the spokespersons on both sides? Because in each party there are peacemakers and there are warmongers. So you have to be careful who you bring around the table. And what are the critical issues? What issues are being tabled on this and so on? It's a technical thing. It's done universally. Okay, so that is what we think is, that's why we say technical facilitation. And we believe there are a number of civil society groups or even individual citizens who could come together and say, look, let's close this gap. Because otherwise, the president's order is to the civil service. They should put it out. And it's state business, so you are invited, come to this talk and so on and so forth. But there is none. And then the parties themselves have not readily prepared for this dialogue. So we must put the machinery that would enable them come forward or start the conversation together. And the two, whether they start at the beginning or at the end, they are going to have to face to face to talk a lot. But as it opens up and we are looking for the solution, you'll find out that other groups would have views on this, on how to solve the problem. Indeed, there might be a time that the conversations will be opened up to probably the whole public, but you can't do that from the start. For now, once they agree that, yes, these are the steps that we will take, these are the issues we are going to discuss, we will save the talk from failing as it has done in the past.
Doc, some have suggested the president maybe should just exercise his powers. You know, he spoke about legislation when he gave this directive that, look, if you fail to do it, I have this other option. Would it be maybe the way to go?
You know, eventually what they agree, okay, should they meet and talk and they come to some agreement, it will still go to the law. Okay, but that law has a greater chance of implementation and enforcement because these two giants, for the moment, on our political landscape, will commit to it, will be held to it. Okay, now if they do not talk and the president pursues the legislative route, the problem is that laws are not enforced in our country, which is part of the reason why militia have a reason. They should not have gotten to where they have. But we don't touch people, we don't enforce the law, you know, and we let impunity, there's so much impunity. And when it comes to elections, it's some sacredness around wrongdoing. You do wrong, but you can't be touched, and so on and so forth. So we've gone really down. Now, what that means then is that the president might pursue that route, but we still live with the problem where the laws are not enforced. And you can disband the two parties, but you have elections coming in 2020 December, and you have the population polarized around them. So it's complex. I think the president's true wish is a dialogue starts. We need the dialogue like oxygen in our democracy. We have to talk, we have to really get to the eye of the matter, you know, not just scuttle around. So I still think that his first preference, logically speaking, is the best one. But for us, from our analysis, the challenge is, it is not for the two parties to convene themselves because of their history. Okay, yes, when sometimes they'll tell you that in Parliament, we talk together, we work together 95% of the time. It's only when we disagree that the media puts it out. But we have also done research on Parliament and decision making. And what we found is that when matters are controversial, the probability that the parties will fall apart and not dialogue or boycott each other, it's so high. Okay, so there is evidence to back the need to technically facilitate. Now, when you say technical facilitation, maybe because we said technical, it's simply to show that it's not political work. It is simply, some of it is administrative, some is research. You know, they haven't talked to each other. Many of the issues that probably they are afraid of, which is why militias have emerged and to support them or whatever, might have resolved themselves already. Okay, there are no more issues, but they are not talking and they are angry. There's a lot of anger in that space. And so with such anger, talk needs to be rational. You have to create conditions for very rational talk and very measured. And other words, you know, in our society, words fly and so on. And some are harsh, and we are human beings with emotions, and it affects us and so on. So this has to be cold-headed, and you have to think through things. You have to be very reasonable, respected. So the rules of the game have to be defined. You know, that is why I said that in other jurisdictions, once the president said, this is what I want you to do, those who do all these things will be found in the civil service. They are equipped. And they do state business because the president spoke as head of state. You see, he's not party leader. But in the party's own engagement, sometimes they've also engaged him as if he's party leader in this function. In this function, he's head of state. You have to respect the authority. And I think NDC, if you look at their letters, you know, now a lot of courtesies comes in and so on and so forth. But the heart of the matter is that the two parties have obeyed the president. They said they want to talk. They're ready. How do we get the talk off? That is the problem we are trying to advise and say, media, sometimes you should be circumspect, the Ghanaian word, and a bit measured. Maybe this is one area where media ought to send some of its best journalists to go. Because the reportage itself sometimes creates a lot of problems. For example, this statement was issued, it was given to journalists and press houses, yet some of the reports I picked up and others informed me about was like, oh, we disagree with the president and we are supporting NDC.
All right, Doc, in wrapping up...
you need to look at how you yourselves as media are helping to create the right atmosphere for the store.
Advice well taken. But in wrapping up, you've painted quite a process that appears to be complex.
It is.
What is the time frame we should give ourselves with 2020 around the corner?
I think the president is in a hurry. You know, if you read the statement and how quickly he said, I have this route. If the talks come off, it could go very fast. Because the two parties already have decided that they want to talk about militias, and the direction the society wants, those who mandate them, is disband them.
Realistically, when the meeting happens, how much time should we give ourselves?
No, you see, it's a new experience. If we have to also be patient. If we are going to rush the process, often we rush the process that reasoning doesn't prevail. And you see, as a country, I can tell you, we've made very serious mistakes when we spend billions of cedis on events. Biometric register. In 2012, we went for biometric register because we said there's double voting. But the problems around integrity of elections and the ballot and the vote and so on also had to do with our allegations or suspicion that people cross the borders, you know, all over to vote. And we don't see them as Ghanaians. We didn't have this national ID card and so on and so forth. Yet, if we had painstakingly analyzed the problems that undermine the integrity of elections, we would have seen that biometric alone wasn't enough. But we went to biometric. We spent over 200 million, and then we had the worst crisis over election results.
Now, I know I said finally, but what you just said brought to mind something. The ML Short Commission, we've heard revelations. We had the EC chairperson come, say it didn't affect the process. Someone else came and said it affected the process. There are those who also say, just wait for the commission to finish its work for this conversation to happen. What have you learned from the commission's work so far, and what should we do in relation to this mediation talks we're talking about?
I must say that I haven't followed their way. I wasn't in the country for a while and so on. But
we stream live on YouTube.
Yes, you see, yes, I was so busy, and I was even in places that I couldn't, Wi-Fi wouldn't work, telephone and so on. But I think that, and that I meant Nigeria, you know. But what I meant is that during the elections, what I mean is, the civil society group that issued the statement did one earlier on the 19th of February. I wasn't in the country, but they wanted the Milshort Commission to be open, broadcast, transparent, and public, which, you know, they themselves did that anyway. They also wanted NDC members or representatives, because NDC initially had said they wouldn't cooperate or something, and we said, no, please, get in, because the transparency itself means that you can hide things and so on. And there has been various testimony. When you put it all together, the militias have no place in our democracy. These are criminal elements. This is not to be tolerated by any democratic party. So it's going to move us into their proscription, but not only say prescribe, but probably there's going to be a sanction. Should a political party form a militia, probably it should be proscribed. Then you are becoming an army, which goes against the Constitution. You see, so my hope or my optimism, which you point out, is that I think already the parties are at a point to say, and have agreed that this thing should be banned and proscribed. How do we do it?
Exactly.
You see, and that is why the talk is important.
Exactly.
If they were disagreeing on even a talk, then we are in trouble. But they say, no, we respond to the president's call, we respect it. Now they are saying, let's do it this way, let's do it that way. A neutral force or actor must come in to put both the mediation, the facilitation or chairmanship, and the technical information and so on together, so that they will cool off. And when they come, they can face the issues and take us forward.
Thank you very much for your time. Dr. Emmanuel Akwete is Executive Director of IDEC, and it's been an interesting conversation. If you missed any part of it, just get onto YouTube. But coming up in business, Board of Ghana Exim Bank gives approval for disbursement of a 13.5 million CD credit facility for the Cassava Enterprise project. Do stay for details.
The industrialization of cassava.